Keynon Lake is a third-generation Asheville native who grew up with dreams of playing pro basketball. More than anything about his youth, he remembers the foundation his parents provided. Today, he's the founding director of My Daddy Taught Me That. It's a nonprofit born in 2012 from the values Lake attributes to his father. It's right there in the name, and a mission to pass those values down to black youth.
As young men, primarily young black men, the world's going to see you differently. The world's going to look at you in a different lens than they would your counterpart, right? We are not going to sit by a campfire and woe is me because I was born with the darker pigmentation. No, I still have to survive in this world, and I want to live a good life. It's not about surviving, it's about thriving.
I'm Matt Piken, and this is The Overlook, a daily podcast all about Asheville, North Carolina. Today, Keynon Lake talks about what he learned from his parents and how Lake's career in social work led him to start My Daddy Taught Me That. We also talk about the program's evolution and growth and the challenges of instilling the bedrocks of his father's influence to the black youth of today. They say to never buy a used car without really looking under the hood. Jennifer Thomas says the same goes for real estate. Jennifer is a licensed geologist in Asheville who thrives on digging up the dirt. If you're investing in commercial property, call Jennifer first. She'll conduct Phase 1 environmental assessments, investigate the ground for contamination, and oversee any necessary cleanup. For details on what Jennifer brings to the table and to the land, go to gentechllc.com. That's GENNTECLLC.com. I met with Keynon Lake just after the city of Asheville announced it was essentially giving My Daddy Taught Me That, a city-owned building and surrounding downtown property in Asheville's Hunt Hill, as its new headquarters. I began our conversation by asking Lake about his father, Benny Lake.
I had one of those fathers who was a local legend, a local hero. He played with the original Harlem Globetrotters.
Oh, really?
So Curly Neal, Meadowlark Lemon, all those guys used to frequent the house. And when they came to Asheville and played and stuff like that, we would see them all the time. My dad retired from the state. He worked for 30 years at the Juvenile Evaluation Center. My mom worked out there for about 15, 20 years as well. She retired from there. Growing up, I had a beautiful childhood. Couldn't do much of getting in trouble simply because my parents worked for the juvenile centers. So we know your family. Everybody, again, knew my pops. He was, again, a native and playing with the Globetrotters. But everybody knew my family. You know, I had a big family, a bunch of aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff like that. I grew up as the only child, but I had cousins who were like brothers and stuff like that and sisters, so a really tight-knit family.
And this is the Asheville of the 1970s?
I was born in 77.
77,
so
80s.
Yep.
Describe, from your vantage point, looking back today, and even if you were aware at the time, what was life like for a black teenager in Asheville in the 1980s and 90s?
To be quite honest, I think the good thing was my family shielded us from a lot of stuff. We weren't exposed to some of the things that we see happening today when you see everybody recording, even if it's law enforcement or just racism at certain entities and certain levels. I think my family did a really good job of sheltering us from those things. And I was an athlete. When I graduated high school, I was one of the best athletes in the state of North Carolina. I think that also played a part. Being an athlete, people look at you differently, they view you differently. And
true, but athletes get into trouble too.
Oh, no, they get in trouble. But again, like I said earlier in the conversation, I had parents where I couldn't get in trouble.
Yeah, and you mentioned that on the My Daddy Taught Me That website, you were very clear and upfront about Benny Lake and what he meant to you and the path he put you on, he and your mother. And were other teenagers around you, were they not as fortunate to have that kind of upbringing and modeling?
I wouldn't say yes or no. So my dad used to run these basketball clinics. The Hot Shot, he used to shout out to John Teeter and Pepsi Cola, who sponsored the Hot Shot. So these were national basketball events. And so my father and his team, when I say his team, he had Henry Logan and Johnny Bailey, Willie Maples. These were his running partners. And these guys were famous in their own right. Henry Logan right now holds all the records for Western North Carolina as an African-American male. He broke all the records there. He played in the ABA and was a star in his own right. Same thing with Willie Maples. He also played with the Globetrotters. And Johnny Bailey was a phenomenal baseball player. He played basketball, but he had opportunities to do pro baseball. So he had a team of men who used to run clinics and camps. And there was nothing for me to be on a basketball clinic or basketball camp, and there's 15, 20 kids with us. And so when I say my daddy taught me that, my daddy really taught me that. So the model is based off the things that I got from him, learned from him, and stuff like that. And so to answer your question, the premise of my daddy taught me that is not only to uplift and teach these young folks what I've learned from, so to speak, my father and my upbringing, but one of the biggest problems I see in this country is absent parent homes. Right now, today, there's 15.9 million single families in this country. 84% are headed by single moms. So that tells us if you got kids living in a single parent home, they're going to be raised by single moms. So kudos to our single moms for doing a yeoman's job. A lot of these single parents, single mom homes, there's no positive role models in these homes. You know, we have our aunts and uncles and our grandparents and stuff like that. The traditional family is not mom and dad around a dining room table with 3 kids anymore. We got grandparents stepping in.
Yeah.
I also spent almost 20 years with the county as a CPS social worker. So a lot of my work has been based off of what I've seen, particularly in this community. Dealing with neglected and abused kids for almost 20 years, you start to see patterns. And one of the patterns that I've seen, again, when you're doing this work, if you're listening to or reading some of the statistics, it'll have you believe that single parent homes are a black and brown thing. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, where black people only make up 7% of the population. So it didn't matter if I was in what is considered the hood, so to speak, the Hillcrests, the Diva Views, the Pisgah Views, those areas that are stereotypically called the hoods, or if I was in the trailer parks where particularly people of color do not live. I still saw the same things. There was a lack of men in these homes. And so it's like, what's happening with our communities? Why is it that we have all these broken families, particularly not being led by a lot of our men?
And you were noticing this when you were working for Child Protective Services in your 20 years there. And it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong here, that it was a combination of what you were seeing and experiencing in the work you were doing for CPS, combined with drawing on your own upbringing and what your father meant to you, and noticing that other families, other young people were not as fortunate to have that anchor in the family, that adult man. So tell me, how did you begin the crafting of what My Daddy Taught Me This would be?
The program started, and again, it was when my father passed away, I wrote a book. The book that I wrote was titled My Daddy Taught Me That, right? And so the book was written to really help. It was written as a self-help book, but primarily to talk to men about what I felt, again, is the biggest issue. And we have all these women raising our families, being the breadwinners, coming home, being the care provider, then being the nurturer. So and don't get it twisted. Men, we have men who do take care of it, but we have a system that has been put in place to divide and feel like I felt break up the home.
Are you talking about the legal system?
No, not necessarily. I'm talking about, so when I say the system, it's the legal system, it's the economic system, it's everything. So I'm talking about the pipeline to prison. I'm talking about our academic achievement gap. I'm talking about low and poverty and low income, those marginalized, those buzzwords. I'm talking about everything. So when I talk about the system, I'm talking about how it's not just one thing you could put your finger on and say, this is the problem, this is the reason why this is happening. No, we have history of the welfare system being, if you're gonna be on welfare, men can't be in your home. You see what I'm saying? If you're gonna apply for services, that you're gonna need help, it has to be a single mom and her kids. Men can't be in the home with that. So if you have a man in the home, then that's a whole different can of worms. That's part of it. So really attacking the fabric of these systematic structures that have, again, intentionally been put in place to not only fracture the home, but also to catch particularly our young folks early in age to begin that pipeline to prison.
It seems like you're noticing two polar sides that are working against young people. One is the fragmented home, that it's a single family, single parent, usually a mother. That's a challenge unto itself. And a system on the other side that is penalizing that single mother household. It sounds like My Daddy Taught Me That. I want to ask you, did you feel like we can't do anything about the system, so we're going to help people on the other side of the system?
Exactly. While we can spin our wheels and attack the system, first of all, you're going to need a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of this. And even with that, you can have all that in the world. And these things have been designed to see 50 years out. So while we're still in 2023, they're planning for 2053. You see what I'm saying? So we can spin our wheels to do that. But my focus has been, instead of doing that, let's grab some of these young folks while they're still impressionable, while we still can teach them the barriers, the roadblocks. Here's what the penal system has for you. Here's how you can get caught up in the penal system. Here's what not having a good education can do. Here's how you better yourself, not falling victim to these roadblocks, these pitfalls, but giving you equipping you and preparing you to be a functioning citizen in this world. That's the first part. Building confidence, gang prevention, being able to say, okay, you know what? As young men, primarily young black men, the world's going to see you differently. The world's going to look at you in a different lens than they would your counterpart, right?
Yeah.
We are not going to sit by a campfire and woe is me because I was born with a darker pigmentation. No, I still have to survive in this world, and I want to live a good life. It's not about surviving, it's about thriving.
You mentioned your book. Who was your book written for? I imagine you weren't expecting young people to read your book, or were you?
Both. Again, there's life lessons that we can all, again, the life lessons are things that you're going to have to just experience in life, right? But in the book, I talk about certain scenarios, certain situations, things that happen, which I do want our youth to see and learn and read about, right? But the counterpart, again, was for us as men to wake up and say, look, you know what? I'm not a Bible thumper, but my Lord Jesus Christ is who I serve. If we follow that, we know that men are supposed to be leaders of the households, and as we go, our family goes, right? Same thing, you cut off the head of the snake, the body dies. If you remove the men from the home, then that means our women and children are vulnerable to whatever attacks. And so let's make sure that we understand this. Let's make sure that and trust me, I'm a divorcee, me and my wife share a child. And so we have joint custody of a child. So things happen. Things don't work out for families to stay together, so to speak. However, even in the midst of things happening, that does not mean that you get to shun your responsibility as a father or a parent.
What did you want to accomplish in the book that's different than what you're accomplishing through your programming? Or you said the book came first. Did you get the idea already before you even had the book that this will eventually be a program?
Nah, not at all. So the book, again, started off as a tome to my dad, the legacy that he left and what he meant to myself and my family. And as people started reading the book, it was like, okay, this is good. You have some good statistical information in here. What are you going to do next? So then it was like, you could work with men. Like
the group Promise Keepers. I'm sure have you heard of Promise Keepers?
I have heard of Promise Keepers, but we actually started LLC about 6 years ago called Black Men United. And really being able to get men, not only of color, but men period, to start focusing on our communities. Showing up to city council meetings, county commissioner meetings, finding out what's happening in your community so you could be better equipped to not only handle that, but to help provide resources, accountability, knowledge, information, So that was one of the first things. But then I said, well, Frederick Douglass said, it's easier to raise strong children than repair broken men. But then it was like, we can still work with men, but why not work with our youth who are the most vulnerable, but start planting these seeds before they become adults. So first of all, they can go in the right direction, and then they won't have to face some of these same problems that we're facing today.
That seems really logical and yet an entirely different challenge. When you decided, let's work with youth directly, that's an entirely different paradigm and challenge than working with others your age, other men your age.
You're right.
So talk about what you had to learn on the job. You'd been working in CPS for 20 plus years.
Right.
Obviously, you had a lot of experience with young people, but in the construct of an entire family. How did you begin building a program designed for youth? What were things that were new to you in terms of teaching that you were developing really on the fly and from the ground up?
You're exactly right. So some of the things that were new were just really experiencing the new, I would say, the generational shifts and changes. What worked for you, and I don't want to put you in my age category. I may be a whole lot older, right?
I think I'm a lot older. But, I just turned 60.
I hope I look as good as you when I turn 60. That's what's up.
Thanks.
So I'm 46. But
Okay.
So the way you and I were raised, these kids, it's a totally different generation, right? And a lot of times we fall victim to, this is how I was raised and this is how you're going to be raised because it worked for me. These kids have these computers in their hands, which are called cell phones now, right? They have access to social media. All the information that you and I have access to, 13-year-olds have, 12-year-olds have the same access to this stuff, right? And so it's just a totally different generation. So with that, you still keep some of those things that you were trained and learned and taught and raised up, but you have to It's almost giving medicine with the sugar. I'm gonna give you this cake, but it's gonna have some stuff in it too that's gonna help you grow and learn and stuff. So that was part of it, just really being able to, the shift of generational shifts. But then I got my degree, to be honest, I don't have a degree in in social work. My degree was in sports medicine. And so I say that to say I'm not a teacher, right? So learning how to really teach, learning how to home in on those skills and using my public speaking skills and stuff like that, it just started becoming very natural. Planning our sessions, our program sessions, 2 to 3 times a week. And so finding myself almost like a teacher with these planning sessions. So this is what we're going to do on Monday. This is what we're going to do on Wednesday. And then it started flowing. And to be quite honest, I had a lot of help from the man up above to really show grace and allow me to learn and implement and have time to do that while working a full-time job as a social worker.
Matt Piken here from The Overlook. I'll be back to my conversation in just a moment, but I'm asking you, the listener, yes, you listening this very moment, is The Overlook making a difference in your connection to Asheville? Do you know more about what makes this city tick and where we're struggling? Let me ask, if you had to give up 1 cup of coffee every month to do your part to keep this show going, would you step up? If you answered yes to any of that, and I really hope you did, please support The Overlook by giving just $5 a month. Your support keeps this show free for anyone to hear. Go to patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. Supporters get free tickets to my first live podcasting events, and I have some very cool items that come at higher levels of giving. Your support means the world to me. Go to patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. You'll also find a link in all our social channels. I began the second half of our conversation by asking Keynon Lake how he first put his ideas into practice outside of his work with Child Protective Services.
When I started my program, it was just like a cold turkey thing. I'm going to start this program from these kids. Our meeting days are going to be on Mondays and Wednesdays, and we're going to do activities on Saturdays, and I'm just going to see how it goes. And I said, I'm going to give myself a 5-year period. I'm 35. I'm going to give myself 5 years to see how this thing works, and I'm going to dedicate that to this calling that I'm getting pulled to do. Well, year 1, we had 8 kids. We were in Pisgah View apartments. We had 4 Caucasian kids, 2 African-American kids, and 2 Hispanic kids in Pisgah View apartments.
All from that apartment complex?
All from that apartment complex.
Why that apartment complex?
Because that's where I was doing a lot of work through my social work, but I had a few relationships with the property manager and the building manager. So look, you can meet in our community center for free. You don't have to pay us anything.
Wow.
So I was like, that's cool, we'll do that. And that's where we started. We started in Pisgah View apartments. It started from 8 to 12 to 20, and it just kept growing.
How did kids come into your program over time? Was it just referrals, like kids talking to other kids?
That's exactly how it was. For the first 4 or 5 years, it was just, again, it first started as a 3-month program. 3 months, you come in, you get these skills, you learn these skills and trades, and you move on. It was 3 months. We had 8 kids. I think we had 2 or 3 more that joined. So we only had 11 kids. So it was like, you guys can still stay for another 3 months. That second 3-month period, we had a waiting list of 15 kids. And so I went to tell some of those kids, look, you guys have been with us for 6 months now. It's time for you guys to move on and transition. I'm going to bring these other kids in. One of our older kids at the time, his name was DeAndre Smith. He said, Mr. Keynon, you can bring in whoever you want to bring in, but this is our program. We are not leaving. We're going to be. And so at that point, I actually, that same night, the property manager, her name is Mrs. Allison, she called. She said, the kid said you're kicking them out of the program. So I said, no, I'm not kicking them out. I said, but they've served their time. It's time for them. She said, Keynon, let me just say this to you. She said, over the last 5-6 months that you've been here, these kids haven't been fighting. They haven't been in any trouble. They look forward to being in this program. I would please encourage you not to do that. And so at that point, I had to reevaluate the whole structure of the program, and then it became a year-round program, so we don't stop. We go year-round from January to December, and we keep the thing going.
When did this become your full-time work?
Oh, man, 2012.
So right then and there.
Right then and there.
How did you get funding?
The first 2 years, I literally funded it out of pocket. But it was doable. And I didn't even seek funding. We weren't an official nonprofit. It was just me doing what I could do to help the community, help our youth. And the first 2 years, I never forget, I was doing my taxes and my accountant said, you spent almost $20,000 over the last 15 months with this. I was like, there's no way. I'm a social worker. I don't have $20,000 About a week or two later, this guy in community, he had been paying attention, and he said, let me talk to you for a second. He said, you Benny Lake, son? And yeah, that's my dad. Yeah, I see what you've been doing, man. You might want to turn this into a nonprofit and start getting donations. And I said, oh, that's not necessary. I'm good. I got this. We're good. And I felt at the time I didn't have any kids. I wasn't married. It was just me. My bills were paid. I was great. And so as long as my bills were paid, I was good. And so I never forget, I went home about a week after I had that conversation with this guy, and my lights were off, and my lights were off and something else. And I was like, I didn't pay my bills. And so I said, you know what, this thing is growing. Now instead of us having 8 kids, we got 18 kids, and we got to feed them, we got to do this. So that's when we started getting funding. It's been really slow, even though we're 10 years in. The first 7 years, the doors were opened we had 3 private donors who really just kept the doors open. They were giving us enough donations we're starting to break through the grant cycle now and starting to get that. Kudos to the city. We're about to get a building over here for $1 downtown Asheville. So,
that's amazing. What are you going to do in that building?
Oh my gosh. So not only is it going to be programming for our youth and continue to grow that program, but our kids need a safe space. So
like a community center.
Exactly. There's no Frankie Fun House, no Rec Park, the Fun Depot is gone. So there's nothing for our kids to do in Asheville. Nothing, no skating rings, nothing for our kids to do. And you and I know too much idle time is the devil's playground, right?
Has it been entirely you teaching this entire time?
Yes and no. We have had several volunteers that came through who stayed. So Joe Green, I got to give Joe Green a shout out. Joe Green came along. We've been up and running 10 years. I think about 8.5 years ago, he came along and has been one of our partners and volunteers and just engulfed the My Daddy Taught Me That culture.
Yeah.
Stephen Smith, who came along about 8 years ago, he's our board chair. He owns MS Lean Landscaping. And so he's been there helping us out. And we've had, like, Dr. Morgan has been with us for about 4 years. Dr. Morgan is he's 75 years old. He's a retired MD from DC. We've had a lot of volunteers who come and go and want to help and stuff, but volunteering, once you can't get paid, you move on. But the bulk of the heavy lifting has been on me, but we've had some great volunteers who have supported and been with us for a while. It's never been about me, like me hosting a program so kids can learn from me no. I feel like if it's a community, kids are not going to like you. Some might like you, some might not. But first of all, you can see us interacting as men and see how those unwritten rules that men talk about and stuff, how that works and play. But there might be other men in this room that you can jive with, that you can be more comfortable with than just me. And so you might feel more comfortable talking to Joe Green. You might build a better connection with Stephen Smith. You might have more information about being a doctor with Dr. Morgan. We also have Pastor Shadrack Waters. And so we have a few volunteers, Tony Shivers, who comes and goes. Really being able to have these folks in this program to say they're more than just a Keynon Lake, there's more men, right?
Keynon, let me ask you, how has the program evolved in ways you couldn't have expected or planned?
How the program has evolved, first of all, we have now, is not just My Daddy Taught Me That, who works with young men ages 12 through 19, grade 6 through 12. In 2016, we started a girls' version of the program called My Sister Taught Me That. Same demographics as far as the time frame of meeting with our young women in the ages, but now we can work with the young women. In 2018, we started a junior program. So now we have about 30 young men in our junior program. So now you can be in the My Daddy Taught Me That program from 5 years old to 19 years old.
Are you finding a difference when you get young people that young, like 5, 6, 7 years old? Is it making a real tangible difference even by the time they're 12? Are you seeing a difference in kids? Now, you haven't been running the junior program, at that long probably to have that kind of sample test.
Yeah, some great questions. So what we just did, we just had our first load of our junior program kids transfer to literally a month ago. So we've had Cavani, Daquan, Anthony, and Bryson. Those 4 kids started off in the junior program at 5, 6 years old. Now they're 11 and 12, and they're in the they're in the main program. And so we're seeing how these kids are being able to grow up with the traditional My Daddy Taught Me That upbringing, being in this role, now coming into with the bigger space with the older kids, right? We also developed in 2018, we have an ambassador program. So our ambassador program is, we have kids who age out, like you from 12 to 19, grade 6 to 12, At 19, you're supposed to either go to college or start life, right?
Yeah.
Like anything else, we got kids who are not ready. So we have a lot of kids who, you're 19, you're still coming to program every Monday and Wednesday. You're one of the students. And what are we going to do with these kids? We got 12, 19-year-olds in here, and they're not leaving. They want to still be a part of the program. So what we did also in 2018 to make it not only give more responsibility to our older kids, you're now responsible for training and teaching our juniors. None of our volunteers, none of the OGs, that's what they call us, the OGs of the group. It's you guys have been in this program 5+ years and who have graduated out, it's your responsibility to run the junior program.
That's a really smart idea because it instills a sense of responsibility on these kids. And also, it doesn't surprise me that you had older kids who didn't want to leave. And I'll put out a supposition, you tell me if this is true, that you said they're coming to classes, they graduated the classes. They don't look at it as school. No. They look at it as this is their life and their community. Exactly. And they don't want to be kicked out of their community.
Exactly.
And also how fragile, healthy community is for them, right? Outside the walls of my daddy taught me that, who knows what kind of influences, other things happen in their life. And while they live their lives and want to be productive, they're more prone to the elements outside, and they don't probably feel super secure in tackling it on their own.
Like I have one of our older ones, like the guy I told you about, DeAndre, who started. He started our program with a guy by the name of Christopher Codwell. Christopher Codwell was one of those first 8 that I talked about.
Yeah.
Chris just turned 25 years old, 25 or 26 in December. And he's working construction out in Hendersonville. And he called me a few weeks ago and was like, I just want to let you know. He gave me thanks for being in the program, but he also talked about some of the challenges that he's having and some of this. And so you're right. It's home. It's a sense of comfort. And they know that they can be heard. They know that their voice is not coming. They know that they can come and get not only the advice, but the support, the help that they need. We have all those programs that we added for our youth. But over the last 2 or 3 years, so in 2021, we started a track program, and my daddy taught me that track team. So now we have about 50 kids running track, and they're actually leaving this Saturday to go to their first track tournament down in Charlotte.
Are there open meets like that?
Yep, we're taking 20. I think we're taking 21 of our youth going to Charlotte this Saturday to go down there. But what has truly been just a true blessing has been over the last year. So over the last year, a group of men have come aboard. So we did a contract with Asheville City Schools in 2021. We're actually chaperoning the schools now, right? So these men and these volunteers, we're going to the schools and chaperoning, helping teachers and helping the students and behavior issues, all that stuff. But these men are bringing different components. And so Michael Hall has a fatherhood program, right? So now it's called, my daddy taught me that generation to generation fatherhood program. Stephen Smith wants to do, even what I told you about his MS Lean, he's training and teaching our kids. Kevin Ellison and Daniel Young, they're both certified chefs. They want to start training and cooking. And so it's this beautiful synergy where these men have been in the system or been with us long enough to see the vision. And it's like, we can't do anything but help give back in ways that's going to impact the community, but help uplift our youth.
How many kids have come through your program so far to this date?
In the 10 years, 11 years that we've run, I think all in all, I think the last time we did numbers was about 1,100, 1,200.
That's amazing. And probably you see these men on the street all the time now, who are in their 20s and even early 30s at this point, probably. Let me ask you talked about how faith for you has been an underpinning of your direction, and you've said, the man above has pointed you in this way. Is My Daddy Taught Me That a secular program, or is there a faith-based element to what you're doing?
So we're not a secular program, and what I do is this. We do pray when we eat. We have the kids pray and stuff like that, but we're not Bible thumpers. We're not in there preaching the word and stuff like that. I'm not a preacher. We do have preachers come and talk to our kids about faith and stuff like that. I will say that we're led by my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, but we're not a faith-based organization, I would say. We want to make sure that we're respecting everybody. People come who we welcome. In fact, some of our volunteers are Muslims. So,
I was just going to ask you about that.
Some of our volunteers are Muslims. So we respect all faith, we respect all religion, and we want to make sure that, because in the end, it takes a community, and you might be a community that doesn't believe what I believe, but as long as you're doing what's right and you're not going against not only the culture, but you're not teaching our youth, you're leading them astray, leading them down a path that's going to cause them to be incarcerated or wind up worse, which is 6 feet under.
You have so many programs now happening under the My Daddy Taught Me That banner, Ambassador, Junior, the regular program. You mentioned this other element. Do you worry sometimes that you're growing too fast, or is it that you're just discovering all these specific needs that need to be addressed, even though you're at your capacity, that you can't help but take that on?
Yeah, man, you who provides your questioning? You've asked some great questions. That's awesome. I think that's a both and type thing. So we are at capacity, particularly so I became our first full-time employee in 2021 when I left the county. Last year, we were able to hire some of our volunteers. We hired 9 part-time other staff. And they're only part-time, but it's been a beautiful thing. But let me just say this. While we are at capacity, there's a true need. And so I think it's exactly what you said. Wait a second. This organization is geared to uplift, teach, help, mentor our youth. But there's another side of that. Like, I can't uplift, mentor, and help youth when I know that the family dynamics are what they are. You might have a single mom who might be unemployed, who needs help. So how can we not only help the youth, because that's always been my lane, right? Helping the youth. And when it was 90% of me doing everything, I can only focus on what I feel like my gift is and what my calling is, which is the youth. Now that we have other people on board, now we can have home visits and home checks after school 2 to 3 times a week. Now we are able to do this. Always, when you have things going, you're going to need funding. You're going to need those extra resources to help those things manifest and come to fruition. No one organization is going to be able to do it alone, right? However, what you can do is partner with other organizations. Shout out to the Spark Foundation with Jackie Latek, the Pods with Shonda Sanford, YTL with Libby Cowles. Those guys who are really doing the work in the community. What I would say is that you have to have those partners, but you have to have people willing to go outside of the box.
You touched on a couple of things about getting back in some ways to the social work that you were trained in, that you making these home visits and a complete holistic approach to helping these kids. Do you see yourself replicating this model elsewhere?
We hear all the time, what can it take to get you guys here? We need this here. We need a program like this there. We get calls from Greenville, South Carolina. Look, we see this My Daddy Taught Me That program. Where is it at in Greenville? We see it in Asheville. Where is there one here? And so being able to duplicate the program, I think, can be not only rewarding for the communities who have the program in their city or in their community, but it'll be an opportunity for the program to grow and expand as well.
Is there anything I haven't asked you about the path of My Daddy Taught Me That, or your path, that you think is important for people to know going forward?
First of all, I think that you have asked some of the best questions ever on an interview, and I've been on a lot of them.
Oh, cool.
And so you've done a wonderful job.
Thanks.
So thank you for having me. But I would just end with, a lot of people do the work for whatever reasons. I would want, and I think this has been one of the reasons why My Daddy Taught Me That has been so successful, is because the work that we do is genuinely work from the heart and compassion, right? Truly having a bleeding heart for not only our community, but for our youth and our families. And I would want folks to know how serious we are about changing the dynamics, really being able to have our kids in situations where they not only can succeed, I mentioned this earlier, but where they can thrive. Most of us want to live a good, productive, thriving life. And so really being able to have that American dream for our kids and being able to say, okay, you know what? We had a hand in putting those kids on the right path to success. That's the only reward I need.
And lastly, can people still see you out on a basketball court?
No, not at all. So I'm about 60 pounds overweight and you know, skill set is still halfway there, but you know, I'm at an age now where your brain tells you that you can still do this and that and the third, but your body's like, not a chance.
For sure.
And so, okay. I'll watch and, you know, shoot a couple of shots, but me actually playing.
I want to thank my guest today, Keynon Lake of My Daddy Taught Me That. If you have thoughts or comments about today's show, please leave them on our social channels, or better yet, leave a message on the Overlook line at 984-278-7301. We might just use your comments in an upcoming episode of the Overlook. Today's conversation happened inside the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which owners Susan and Giles Collard have been so gracious enough to open to me to record my interviews. Our theme music for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes courtesy of the Asheville band The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. New episodes are online by 6 a.m. every weekday wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at podavl.com. And please support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. I'm Matt Peiken, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook.